Secretary of State Marco Rubio says there's been slight progress on negotiating a deal to end the war with Iran. And those comments come as Tehran's leaders consider the latest U.S. proposal. Now, Rubio was speaking at a NATO foreign ministers meeting in Sweden. The secretary tempered expectations of an agreement, though, alluding to unresolved differences over Iran's nuclear enrichment and, of course, that standoff over the Strait of Hormuz.
Iran is trying to create a tolling system. It can't happen. If that were to happen in the Straits of Hormuz, it will happen in 5 other places around the world. Why would countries all over the world say, well, we want to do this too?
For more on the situation in the Middle East, we're joined now by Dan Raviv. He is host of the Mossad Files podcast and author of Spies Against Armageddon, Inside Israel's Secret Wars. Dan, good morning. As work continues to try and find a peace agreement between Iran and the U.S., how does Israel fit into all of this, especially after President Trump this week said Prime Minister Netanyahu will do, quote, whatever I want him to do?
Quite right. Hey, Lindsay. Well, the thing to keep in mind is when this war began on February 28th, that was the U.S. and Israel absolutely operating together. Joint airstrikes hitting Iran really hard. But when the ceasefire began on April 7th, that was President Trump's idea. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu pretty clearly did not agree with the idea of a ceasefire. The Israelis still have a long list of targets. They say to prevent Iran's nuclear program from being revived and to hit Iran's ballistic missiles even harder. So this week, when President Trump said that Netanyahu is a good guy and will do whatever I want him to do, that was embarrassing to Netanyahu. So far, he said nothing, but the two, Netanyahu and Trump, are said to have had a tense phone call this week.
And what's interesting is that Netanyahu has been a longtime leader of Israel. He is a skillful politician. And despite continual domestic pressures and issues he faces, he tends to come out unscathed, or at least on top and in power. What are some of the current local pressures the Prime Minister is under? Because they appear to be mounting.
Yeah, Errol, you said current and you said local. So keep in mind, there was a war from February 28th to April 7th. The Israeli economy practically shut down. The airport was closed. People weren't traveling. They were running off to bomb shelters several times a day. Very annoying, to say the least, but also it means the Israeli public want to see the achievements, the results, right? Netanyahu frames it as part of a comeback, a victorious comeback after the humiliation of October 7th, 2023. Israelis were massacred, hostages were taken. And so it's a big comeback, but you have to say that in Gaza, where there's a stalemate, and in Iran, from Israel's point of view, it's unfinished business.
Israel moved a step closer this week to a snap election after lawmakers voted unanimously in favor of a preliminary bill to dissolve the Knesset. When could we see an election in Israel, and how can Netanyahu hang on to power?
Right, it's a parliamentary system, so snap elections can happen, but there has to be an election by the last week of October. And so some parties are moving for elections in September. May not make a big difference, but Netanyahu wants more time to achieve what people will accept as more victories. So that's really the big pressure. Every Israeli election for the past 10 years has been almost 50-50, really close. Netanyahu could form a coalition. Right now he has one with heavy right-wingers who want to keep the West Bank and Gaza forever. That's made Israel very unpopular around the world. Israel knows it's got declining popularity in the U.S. Those are factors that weigh against Netanyahu. He may not win. The election has to be called, as we said, within just over 5 months.
And an earlier story from this week was Israel's national security minister facing backlash over video emerged of him taunting some detained flotilla activists. As you mentioned, the Prime Minister has to deal with different factions of this coalition. Do you think it's likely he would be, Netanyahu, ousted from power? If so, what would that mean to who might be next?
Well, that would happen only in an election. Election results in Israel are very complex. More than a dozen parties compete for seats, and then you have to put together a coalition. Netanyahu's obviously great at that. He's been prime minister for just short of 20 years, believe it or not. And so Itamar Ben-Gvir, that almost everyone says obnoxious, very nationalistic right-wing minister, he's not in Netanyahu's party. And Netanyahu may try to drop him next time. But for now, he's a minister who around the world is adding to a decline in popularity for Israel, which I do think is a strategic issue for the Jewish state.
All right, Dan Raviv, thanks so much.
Thank you, Dan.